The stage is set. At last, Velgrynd began her explanation of the situation. I have received words of apology from the Inglacia royal family. Their wounds from the recent attack have yet to heal, and they wish to minimize the deployment of their forces. As she spoke, Velgrynd glanced toward a corner of the tent. There, seated, were the representatives of Inglacia, who had come as envoys. Though their forces were minimal, some among them were strong. However, in the presence of those gathered here, they were weak by comparison, rendering their influence negligible. They simply nodded at Velgrynd's words, taking a stance of passive observation. So, you should assume that there will be no further reinforcements. Velgrynd declared firmly, urging everyone to brace themselves. There might be reinforcements in reality, but they could not be relied upon. At least, from Velgrynd's perspective, they would be insignificant at best. That was the reasoning behind her statement. Luminous nodded and prompted her to continue. And, what next? Velgrynd responded by revealing the information she had shared with Tensura. In what was once Urzania, my elder sister, Velzard, is currently in combat with Guy. As I mentioned earlier, there was a third-party intervention, but Tensura managed to stop it, resetting the battle. Some are working to prevent this conflict from affecting the planet, but the situation was far from favorable. If Guy and Velzard fought seriously, the consequences would be unimaginable. The ideal outcome would be for the battle to conclude before that happened, but things were unlikely to go so smoothly. In the worst case, should Guy lose, Velzard would be free. If Velzard were to attack from behind, humanity would be finished. You'd best pray that doesn't happen. Velgrynd was merely stating the facts, but those who heard her had complicated feelings. They could not refute her words and had no choice but to accept them. All they could do was pray that such a scenario never came to pass and focus on dealing with the immediate crisis. Now then, regarding the imminent threat, the world-destroying dragon Ivarage, I would like to discuss our response. The one who spoke was Xian, who had been standing silently at the side, rather than taking a seat. Taking on the role of moderator in the situation, he stepped forward in front of Velgrynd. We must finalize our strategy before the army of Cryptids arrives. At present, the entire perimeter of Heaven Tower is designated as a security zone, but even if we distribute our forces, it will be difficult to cover the entire area. I would like to hear your opinions on this matter. Xian inquired of Velgrynd. Among those present, Velgrynd was the most knowledgeable, and as a result, she was naturally expected to take on a role akin to the Supreme Commander. Velgrynd had no objections to this. Having long held the rank of Marshal within the Empire, she confidently voiced her strategic insights without hesitation. Positioning troops everywhere is nothing but a foolish tactic. First, you must shape the battlefield into a more advantageous position and lure the enemy in. And by that, you mean, you have a barrier, don't you? I could deploy my 8 gates formation, but that alone wouldn't be enough to trap the entire enemy force. So, Velgrynd shifted her gaze toward the Holy Knights. Understanding her intent, Hinata took over the conversation. I see. You mean the Holy Purification Barrier, correct? Would it be accurate to assume that the aggressors from the other world are composed of magicules? Yes, about half of their bodies are composed of magicules. They likely contain unknown substances not found in this world as well, but the Holy Purification Barrier should still be effective against them. Everyone nodded in agreement. Indeed, the 8 gates formation was useful for halting enemy movement, but its formation was disadvantageous for a defensive battle. It was most valuable when one had absolute superiority and needed to contain enemy forces without interference. However, it was not an ideal technique for defensive warfare. Additionally, with the enemy's total numbers still unknown, setting up a formation that could encompass all of them was highly impractical. If the world-devouring dragon, Ivarage, were to appear, Velgrynd was the only one capable of confronting it. Even with Hinata and Luminous included, the others simply wouldn't be able to stand against it. This was Velgrynd's assessment. Since she had to focus on taking down Ivarage, she needed to conserve as much strength as possible. Her true intention was to leave the subordinates to Luminous and the others, allowing her to direct all her power toward the enemy leader. In that sense, the Holy Purification Barrier is the optimal solution. Even if it were a circular tower that allows entry and exit from any point around its circumference, enveloping it with a barrier would make it possible to guide the enemy's movements. However, there was also a problem. But the Holy Purification Barrier cannot be established unless it is connected in the sky. Since the Heaven Tower is an ancient structure that reaches the heavens, I believe it may not meet the conditions required for the ritual to succeed. Cardinal Nicholas, who was standing behind Hinata, pointed out the issue directly. Hinata was also aware of this. To activate the Holy Purification Barrier, at least 3 practitioners must be positioned at equal intervals, forming a polyhedron that connects to a single point in the sky. It doesn't need to be a regular polyhedron, but it is said to be most effective when shaped like a pyramid, such as a quadrangular pyramid. The problem this time is that the tower obstructs the formation of the crucial intersecting point in the sky. While there are ways to solve this issue, it's not entirely impossible. Even if enclosing it with a surface is impossible, there are still ways to do it. Hinata murmured this to herself. That's right, Luminous nodded. The Heaven Tower has a series of doors at the ground level, but as you go up to a certain height, there aren't even windows prepared. This means there's no worry about flying cryptids spilling out from the upper parts of the tower. If a relay point for the barrier is set up at the topmost window, it wouldn't be impossible to form an irregular Holy Purification Barrier. However, the danger for those stationed at the top would be too great. It has been decided to deploy troops around the four sides of the Heaven Tower and await the enemy. That is the safest and most certain method. They must lure the enemy and form a formation that can reliably counterattack even with a small number. If the tower is surrounded in a triangle, the overflowing demon beasts would concentrate on three sides. This would excessively increase the density at each point, risking the fall of one of the vertices. In contrast, deploying in a square formation would disperse the enemy to four sides. The density at each point would decrease, and the number of enemies in contact with the barrier would also lessen. Even if a stronghold were to fall, the barrier could be irregularly adjusted by moving the strongholds, maintaining its effectiveness to some extent. This is merely an emergency measure, burdensome and unsustainable for long periods, but having the possibility to regroup makes a significant difference. For these reasons, it is preferable to set up the Holy Purification Barrier at four ground locations forming a square. Then, what happens at the upper levels? At least 3 people are needed, just like when activating it on the ground. However, if a square formation is set up on the ground, correspondingly, 4 people would be needed at the upper levels as well. That was the crux of the problem. The Holy Purification Barrier formed by this method would be square at the bottom, but circular at the top. The sacred power must run along the walls of the tower, forming a circle connecting the 4 points on the ground. In other words, it means that we need military strength to defend 4 locations. Their air power is already limited, and they have to disperse it even further. On top of that, they must fight while protecting the mages. It's going to be a difficult mission, but failure is not an option. It's tough, but we have no choice but to do it, Hinata concluded. If we were to say we won't do it because it's hard to defend, it would be a disgrace to our name. Now is the time to show the true worth of the Holy Knight Order. Leonard nodded firmly in response to Hinata's words. Inspired by this, the captains in charge of the sky, land, water, and wind also steeled their resolve. The 4 of us will take charge of the skies. Thanks to our training, we've mastered the use of Holy Spirit armaments, and we can fly, so we're well suited for the task, declared Arnaud. His willingness to volunteer for such a dangerous position impressed everyone in the room. The other captains were no less determined. That's right. Compared to that training, this mission might even feel easier, Bacchus agreed with a laugh. Following his lead, Lytus and Fritz also voiced their readiness. Exactly. That was hell, wasn't it? Coming back to life after dying is fine and all, but why do we get no pain reduction? It's like they're messing with us. Because of that, everyone ended up gaining pain nullification, but still. Fritz's words had turned into pure complaints. Masayuki, unsure whether to laugh or offer comfort, froze with an awkward expression. Do you have something to say? No, I don't. When Hinata coldly questioned him, Fritz responded quietly. This exchange had become something of a routine. Fritz deliberately lightened the mood to ease the tension in the room. Hinata understood this and intentionally played the role of the antagonist. A small laugh broke out, lifting everyone's spirits a bit. With the atmosphere now more relaxed, Hinata moved on to address the core issue. Now, about the remaining 3 members. At this point, 5 people, including Leonard, were involved in the operation's key tasks. To activate the Holy Purification Barrier, 3 more advanced practitioners of holy magic were needed. Nikolaos, can you do it? Understood. Nikolaos, the Cardinal, Hinata's trusted confidant and an ardent fan of hers. Though he held the highest position as a Cardinal, his true devotion was to Hinata. Nikolaos saw himself as Hinata's loyal dog, so refusing her orders was never an option. As for Nikolaos's abilities, he had reached the level of a sage, as evidenced by his ability to cast spiritual collapse single-handedly. His strength even surpassed that of Leonard, the vice-captain, making him more than capable of fulfilling the mission. The fact that he was on par with the captains of the Holy Knight Order was a closely guarded secret, but Hinata had seen through it. That's why he had been chosen for this major promotion. Now, only 2 remained. Hinata's gaze pierced through Sar and Gregory, who were desperately trying to avoid eye contact. How long do you plan to stay silent? Being asked so directly, Sar finally resigned himself to the situation. Raising both hands in surrender, he reluctantly lifted his head and spoke. All right. I'll take care of one side. The other side, Gregory, you. Wait. Huh. I'm no good with barriers and stuff. Silence fell over everyone. Gregory the bolder man, once known as a guardian of humanity. He was one of the legendary warriors of Luke Genius, the elite division directly under the Holy Emperor's command. He stood on equal footing with the captains of the Crusaders, and his combat prowess was well above average. It was only natural to assume that he could at least handle the holy field technique. And yet, here he was, making a shocking confession. Huh, no way. Sar asked in disbelief. I'm serious, Grigory replied, his face turning red. Everyone realized he was completely useless in this situation. Every holy knight belonging to the Crusaders was a warrior of at least daring strength. Anyone could provide support, and many could wield the standard holy field without issue. But this time was different. If there was even one significantly weaker member, maintaining the barrier would become impossible. Adjusting the activation to accommodate the weak would only weaken the barrier's strength, rendering it meaningless. Since the mission involved guiding the cryptids, the entire operation would collapse the moment the barrier was broken. Thus, all the casters needed to be of similar strength.